Hello, beautiful people. I'm recording this the day after Heizou's released. He's been out for about 24 hours now. The rest of this video is going to be from my stream that was recorded almost a day ago now. But I did want to add like disclaimers to the video. I'm relatively negative on my outlook on Heizou in the video. I just want to make it very clear that the reason why I'm negative is because I was expecting him to be really good. And overall, I'm quite disappointed with what we ended up getting compared to what my expectations were. That doesn't mean he's bad. He's definitely one of the better 4 stars we've had since release, but I don't think he feels nearly as good as a lot of the other choices in a lot of his teams. Also, right now, because of something I'll talk about later in the video, which is the current Abyss lineup, we don't really have a way to properly test Heizou in the content where he's really the best at. And so that's obviously going to make him feel a lot worse, right? Like by default. So that's another thing that's kind of like working against him right now. But yeah, like the biggest like issue that he has is that he's very much just mostly a downgrade compared to the other anemo options, but most likely you already have Sucrose. Obviously not everyone does, but he's a 4-star, so most people do. And then on top of that, he's on the same banner as Kazuha, which means if you're actively going for him, it's not unlikely that you just get a Kazuha along the way. So and it's pretty unrealistic to assume that you'll get any of his constellations without getting a Kazuha. And I do think that if you do get a Kazuha, then on one team you'll put Sucrose, and on the other team you'll put Kazuha, and there's just not much room for Heizou. But yeah, that being said, he's still like definitely a solid unit. If you like him, you can definitely make him work. But yeah, just keep in mind that the rest of this video is really just initial reactions to something that I was pretty excited for, and that's why I end up being quite negative, because I'm just disappointed. Alright, we're in, chat. Let's go play him, yeah? Okay, first thing I want to do... Interesting. The way that he keeps walking forward in between his normal and his charge attack is a little bit weird, though. Like, I should get the Witsys stuff. He seems to have really good tracking for enemies. Let's do this. Oh, his E itself swirls, and it gives him a stack. But I'm curious as to how fast it charges up. Yeah, that is way too... Oh my, that is so bad. Okay, never ever use your hold E. Cool. His damage looks really low right now, but I don't know if it's because we got scuffed builds. Not really. Like, his build seems fine. A lot of VR. Yeah, so you never hold E. You just always get some swirls beforehand. But yeah, you do N1C Q and 1C E. But yeah, like, his N1 has, like, really good tracking range. Like, I'm pretty far from these enemies, and we're still reaching. Let's try to take a look at the grouping. That is not it. That's really not that good. And his E AoE seems very small. Like, the way that the slime just stays where it was doesn't look very good. I'm guessing you kind of need C2 for it to be a decent grouping. Let's look at the swirls, right?
This charged attack didn't swirl because the enemy didn't have Hydro anymore. Barbara moment.
Okay, it does look like what I was expecting is indeed accurate in terms of ICD. When he's spamming N1C, he gets swirl on N1, swirl on charge attack, nothing, swirl on charge attack. Swirl on N1, swirl on charge attack, nothing, swirl on charge attack. So on your N1C, you get an average of 1.5 swirl. Yeah, that's a pretty high amount of swirls. And his tracking is pretty good, so he's probably going to be pretty good in Taser. Also, I think the biggest issue that in the trial run that jumps out to me is how much I get fucking staggered by shit, because he's got pretty committal animations. So the resistance to interruption that you get from Xiao and Orbedo could actually be very, very valuable. Let's do 796. Okay. Anemo, crit, attack. What the fuck is this? Huh. R3 Scoured Atlas, interesting. Okay, let's see how much we can make this E hit for. We got 100k. But it doesn't seem very good for sure. Not much of a surprise. Don't think Hyper Heizou is gonna be very good. Hello again, YouTube. This is Next Days of Jeff. I just want to show a rotation that you can do with International with Heizou. So he doesn't have a way to get a swirl in the same fashion that Kazuha does or Sucrose does, because he can't go a swirl and he can't infuse one of his attacks with anemo from Bennett Burst. It's always gonna just look at the enemy. So the setup you want to be doing, in single target at least, is Child E, Bennett Burst, Guoba, swap to M, and keep going like this. This team is okay. You lose the grouping that you would get from Kazuha or Sucrose. I don't like it as much, but it's definitely functional. What I am interested in, though, is Taser teams. Let's first try with no additional grouper, something like this. Doesn't feel as bad, but honestly, it feels so much worse than Sucrose. I really don't like it at all. Man. Yeah, the lack of grouping just... Let's try it in the one thing where I actually do think he's gonna be good. I think the biggest problem we have here is our Kazuha's too strong, so it's hard to tell how much of the work is being done by Heizou and how much it is just high constellation Kazuha doing things. Yeah, it doesn't feel like he's doing anything. Am I just doom posting, or is he worse than I thought he would be? Let's change his build. You might be thinking, yeah, that's pretty decent, right? So I'm gonna show you what happens if you use Sucrose instead. Like, we're doing faster with Sucrose alone than with Heizou on field with Kazuha on the team. Because of the fucking better grouping and the better range, right? Let's try in single target variation. Because that's where he should be better. That's where I fucking hope he's better. So here's the thing, chat. We're gonna be cheating. We're gonna be using the C2 Yelan and pretending that Heizou's doing the work. Yeah? Damn! Woo! Like, at the end of the day, right? Not being as good as Sucrose doesn't mean he's useless, but it's still fucking unfortunate. Like, this is obviously just Yelan, Xingqiu, and visual carrying, but I don't know, dude. I feel like at that point, I'd just rather run Xiao. Oh, fuck me. I did not just say that, did I? So we start at 904. Start at 38 this time. That was about 50, but he dashed away. Basically about as good, maybe even better. I don't think we can properly test TF in this abyss. I should try it with Venti. I just want to check if it actually, like, if I can attack enemies inside of Venti burst. Okay, the charge attack can hit. The normal attack cannot. I don't know, man. I am really underwhelmed. Okay, so here's a moment of truth, chat. Heizou, Bennett, Kazuha, Xingling. Hell yeah, we finally got a good team. Woo! Yes, sir! Woohoo! What does he do? Shut up. He's generating energy for Kazuha. Do comparison with and without Heizou. It is actually slower without using him. I don't know what else to do, man. I mean, it's working. Is it working? Technically, yes. But, like, just use Sucrose. It's so much better. In my heart. Right? Like, unironically, he could be so much better without even changing his numbers. Just by giving him, like, slightly bigger AoE, slightly better grouping. It feels like his biggest problems is not his numbers. It's just his gameplay. Whatever. Okay, it does seem to group fine, right? But yeah, overall I'm somewhat disappointed. I don't think he's necessarily bad, but the way that his Stagger, which we can show, right? But let's start by showing it against Whopper Flowers. The way that his Stagger works, it knocks enemies back quite a bit on his charge attack. And his charge attacks are basically his main source of damage on an Elemental Mastery build. Because on the Elemental Mastery build, you just want to swirl as much as possible, and the charge attack doesn't have internal cooldown, so it's like your main source of like fast swirling. Now, if you do spam your charge attacks, the enemies get knocked back a lot like Kutsing's charge attack. I guess here, these enemies are immune to Stagger right now, but like you can see it, right? Like it's pretty rough. Now you can just not use your charge attacks, but if you're on an EM build, you're going to lose a lot of damage. Against heavy enemies, this doesn't matter. And I actually do think he's pretty good against heavy enemies, but otherwise I don't like him that much. Right, so against treasure hoarders,
Another test subject.
You still have the knockback, but you can actually catch up to them without dashing, which is nice. That being said, as you can see, a little bit hard to see on this, but what's gonna end up happening is your charge attack size, like your AoE range, is very, very small, which means you're gonna kick one of them away from you and the other one not, and then you've ungrouped them. Effectively, the way that his charge attacks work is the opposite of what anemo units usually do. Instead of grouping the enemies together, his charge attacks separate the enemies, which I'm not a fan of. I think against non-heavy enemies, it feels really, really bad. Without C2, his burst doesn't really group enemies at all. At C2 it does, but it's not insane. It's okay. The range is a lot smaller than in some of the other anemo units, and it doesn't stay on the field. It's just once. What else can we say about him? What teams he's good in, what teams he's not as good in. Like I said, I think the main thing he wants to be played in is content where he's against heavy enemies, but as an anemo unit, he doesn't do as well in single target as he does in AoE, because the way that swirl works, you get more damage in AoE than you do in single target. That being said, because you don't have to build him EM, and because you can build him with attack, he's still okay in single target. Effectively, he's like an okay driver for a single target Taser team with something like Fischl, Xiao, and like if you had Yelan, if you want to go maybe Bennett for some sort of soup team. Right, against bosses, he'll do okay, but his damage output by itself isn't high enough to justify going for something like Bennett, Zhongli, Mona, right? Like, it's not, you don't really want to be playing him hyper. I think that the main content he's going to be good in is when you have multiple heavy enemies. So something like in previous Abysses, we've had 2 Ruin Guards at the same time. I think he's going to be very good against that. In previous Abysses, we've had triple Magu Kenki. I think he'd be very good against that. But yeah, outside of that, he can be played in mono elemental teams with something like Bennett Chengling, and you'd have a Kazuha, right? So you'd have, it's not really mono element, but it's pyro anemo quick swap. I think he's okay in there. I don't think he's the only good unit. I think that there's a lot of good choices for a last slot in this team, right? This core is a pretty strong core, and basically anything can be the last slot, so you shouldn't feel any pressure to pull for him to fill out this team, right? Venti's very good, Klee's pretty good, Xinyan's pretty good if you have C6 Bennett, Jean's pretty good, honestly Sucrose even works, although she's not quite as good there. I haven't looked at soup teams very much so far, right, with something like Toma, I guess. I don't expect it to be very good. In national teams, something like this, he's okay. He functions, he works. I don't think he's as good as the other animal options. Honestly, I think that his biggest problem isn't his numbers. His numbers are completely fine. Right? Like, he doesn't have insane multipliers. He's got a really good multiplier on his E. His normal attacks are really underwhelming. His burst is really underwhelming. But even then, right, he's an animal unit and he has no ICD on his charge attacks. And the way that his normal attacks end up coming out, when you do N1C, 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 you'll get a swirl on the first normal attack, then 1 swirl on the charge attack, and then your next normal attack, this one won't swirl, but then the charge attack will. So effectively, when you do 2 normal attack, charge attacks, normal attack, charge attacks, you'll get 3 swirls in there. And then you can repeat and still get 3 swirls. Effectively, he swirls a lot, right? When he's on the field, he can swirl a lot. The biggest problem is those swirls, like the AoE on it, is very, 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 very small. So it's hard to hit multiple enemies with it, and it knocks enemies away. So his problem isn't his numbers, it's that his area of effect on his attacks is really small, and his knockback is really high. So it ends up being very, very hard to actually use all of his kit when you're not against heavy enemies. And even when you are against heavy enemies, because it's such a small range, they need to be really close together, which is hard to do. Overall, he's okay, but don't expect him to be game-breaking or anything close to that. Like, I don't think there's a single team where Heizou is, like, actually the best slot you can go for. In Taser, I would basically always run Sucrose unless you're against heavy enemies, in which case Heizou works. And honestly, he's a fine replacement for Sucrose. But it's not just that I'd rather run Sucrose, it's that he actively feels bad in Taser. I think that the best way to use him is in a mono pyro team, or in an animal pyro quick swap team, because I feel like he takes away from Taser more than he helps it. The way that you can make your Heizou feel better, feel the best, is probably with this team, whereas the team in which he does the most is probably a Taser team. But it's really hard when you're against non-heavy enemies. I don't like him in National. I think that his lack of grouping is just fucking painful. His lack of good grouping, I should say. I don't like him in Freeze. Personally, I was looking forward to pulling for him. I was even like worrying, damn, I really hope I don't get a Kazuha Constellation on the way there, because I wanna save my pity for Sumeru and the new 5-star characters we're gonna get. But after playtesting him for a day, he's not as fun as I thought he'd be, and I probably won't pull for him. One thing to keep in mind is that while I do think that he feels really, really bad right now, this Abyss is very unfavorable to him. Waterflowers get knocked back more than other enemies because they have very low weight, and Geovishans get staggered with like anything, and they get staggered backwards really, really far. Slimes are basically the worst matchup for an anemo unit, because if you swirl a slime, you're swirling cryo. But they're a slime, so they're immune to cryo. And so this just feels pretty bad. And then he feels okay against the Bathismal Vishops, but they have the same problem as the Geo Vishops, that they get staggered pretty far. And on top of that, they're a lot more mobile. And as an anemo unit whose best place is probably in Taser, he's not something you want to use in single target, particularly. He's okay in single target, but like, he's not the best. So while I am quite disappointed, do keep in mind that they're not really trying to sell him with what we have right now in Abyss. And I would say that this is probably a worse Abyss for him than what we'll usually have. I mean, we got a new Abyss coming in 3 days, right? Maybe that'll be a little bit better. Yeah, like obviously, right? This is all day one thoughts. It's very possible that there's a team I haven't looked at, right? There's a team I haven't thought about. Those things are incredibly, very, very possible. And I will be posting a post-release analysis in like a couple of weeks before the banner goes away. So if you really want like an actual good meta analysis of Heizou, you should wait. There's no downside to waiting 2 weeks in before you wish on a banner. So I would encourage you to wait for that. But yeah, so I hope you have a great rest of your day, YouTube. Goodbye.